Can I get a hello from somebody?
Hey.
Yeah, hi Kofi. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thanks. I hope you
I'm very well. Yes.
Great.
So we'll continue with what we did last Monday, and I also want to say that I'm currently on a work assignment somewhere, and so you might be getting some feedback or some background sound. Kindly bear with me and forgive me. It's because of where I find myself. Okay, thank you very much. And so, let me share my screen, and then we can zoom into our class today. Okay. Okay, so I believe my screen is visible. So we did HTML the last time. We looked at certain tags of HTML, and I think we started working on some HTML tags. And when we ran them, this is what we had. Okay, so today we are going to zoom into CSS. And I must also say that today we are going to combine CSS and Bootstrap. And then, initially I said that we're going to build a web page, a web GIS page, which in future we are going to use where we are going to plug in all the things that we've been learning. And so today we are going to do all together. And so it's going to be a bit compact and piled, but I'm sure we'll be fine. And so to start with, we are zooming into CSS, and CSS is just an abbreviated word for cascading style sheets. The main essence of CSS, and please, I believe you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, okay. We hear you. But the screen, maybe if you can increase it a bit, the size again.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So I was saying CSS is an abbreviated word for cascading style sheet, and its main importance is to add style to our web designs. And so just like you have the skeleton and then you have the flesh, that is more like putting a shape to the skeleton or adding some style to the skeleton. That's what CSS does. It beautifies the HTML syntax or codes that we write. And so CSS, just like HTML, has also gone through versions. It started with CSS1, there was CSS2 at a point, and now what everybody is using is CSS3. And maybe some importance of CSS, if it might be important to somebody. It makes our work beautiful. I mean, it makes our web pages beautiful. It makes the pages load faster. It improves the loading time of the normal HTML. It has a way of creating shortcuts to certain HTML things you would have done with HTML. It gives a shortcut to them. Also, it's easier to manage and maintain than because HTML as it stands has its own way of adding style, but it means that, for instance, if you want to format a text, you would have to write several lines of codes where a CSS could have given you maybe 2 lines. HTML, you would have to write like plenty code before you achieve the same thing. And so with CSS, styling saves is easier and takes a little time. And so when we want to write our CSS code is basically in 2 sections. And then the 2 sections are, we have the selector, sorry. So there's a selector and then there's a declaration. And so let me give an example somewhere. Okay, let me create a new page. And then so in every CSS, there's a selector. So a selector can be what you want to apply the CSS to. So for instance, if maybe in our code here, the header 1 tag is what we want to apply our CSS to, the header 1 here becomes our selector. And then after the selector, we add some declarations to the selector. And so the declarations are put in a curly brackets. And so we create the brackets, and then inside the brackets, we can put our declarations. And the declarations is also in 2 formats. We have one that we call property, the property, and then you bring a colon, and then the property values. And so yeah, so basically this is how CSS codes are written. It's basically like this. All CSS codes are in this format. And so let's take an example. If, for instance, we want to add color to our header 1 tag, it's going to be the selector. So the selector becomes the HTML item we are applying the style to. So the selector, we bring our brackets, and then we input the property. So there are several properties. It can be color. Then we will bring our colon, and then we input our color. The color can be blue. And what happens is you can add one or more properties to the selector. And so, for instance, if we want to add more properties to this header 1 tag, we would have to first close. Then we can either choose to, we can continue, so we can add another property. Let's say font size. So font size is another property. We'll bring our colon, and then we can give in dimension, so 16 pixels. We can add font weight, and then we'll say bold. And so yes, this is how CSS is written. In terms of arranging CSS, I mean, once the code is intact like we've done here, you have no problem. But in terms of you easily identifying your code and seeing where it starts and where it ends, normally people tend to kind of add indentation to their code. And so you see people writing CSS in this way. It's just basically to help them identify, easily read the code that they are writing. CSS also comes with comments. And so in CSS commenting, this is how it is done. You bring your / and a star. And so whatever that comes after the star is treated as a comment. It doesn't affect the code until you close the commenting. So you close it by returning the star and then the /. So any text that happens in here is treated as a comment. So that's for CSS. And so let's begin to add some styling to our web page. Now, there are 3 major ways of applying styles or CSS to HTML. The first one is what they call embedded CSS. So the embedded CSS is basically when you apply your CSS, you embed it in the same code, but you apply it in the header tag. And so you can do a header tag, a style, this tag in the header, and then in the style, you can choose to bring in your CSS code. So yes, so just as we've done, this is a way of embedding CSS into the HTML. So this is the first way that we can write CSS. And so if, let's say we run this code, so this is our hello world. If we run it, you see that it has changed color and style. And so this is the embedded style of writing CSS. The other one that we can do is that we can also do what they call the inline CSS. So with the inline CSS, it is an HTML way of applying CSS. And so you, in your HTML tag, you bring in the syntax style, just as I've highlighted here. And then you put all your code in the style, the quotes of the style. So I can add the color blue, or this time, let me say red. I'll close it. I add my font size. And let me give it a bigger font size. So let me say 38 pixels. And then the font weight. So I'll give it a font weight of bold also. So this is inline. So now I've commented the embedded CSS that I wrote. I've commented it out so that the inline can apply. So if I refresh, we'll see that the styling has changed. So that's the inline style of writing CSS. Then we have the third one where we apply the CSS as an external resource or as an external link. And so to do that, we can just introduce a link tag. And so we introduce a link tag. And then in the link tag, there's this is a typical link tag. There's the href property, and then the href will be a link to our CSS, an external CSS. And so to do this, first we need to create a style page or a style sheet in our project. So let me try and create one here. Let me save this. Let me delete this, and then I'll save this document as a style. Now to CSS, to save a file as a CSS file, you need to add the extension .css so that browsers can see it. So I'll do this style .css, and then I'll save it in the same document. So you realize that as I saved now, because my text editor is seeing it as a CSS file, it is beginning to give me, color differentiation so that I can appreciate the code. And so my style sheet is saved. So I'll come here and I'll reference my style sheet to the path, the style sheet path. And so let me take out the inline CSS, and then I would run the code. Let's see what we have. So yeah, we return to the first code that we have. So these are the three ways that you can write your CSS. Yeah. So, and please, I believe I'm clear. Yesterday, I think I was moving too fast. So today, I want to be slow as possible so that we can catch, or those that will be also writing the syntax to can catch up. So I believe it's okay. Yes. So let's look at some of the measuring units that we can use in CSS. For instance, when we take in all things that in anything that we want to apply size to, there are some standard measuring units that can work in CSS. For instance, when we wanted to apply the header 1 font size, so let me comment this and the color. Header 1 font size, we use pixel. So pixel is a measuring unit that we can use. We can also use a centimeter. So centimeter works also in CSS, and then there's also as a matter of fact, all the standard measuring tools that we know of, they all work. Inches, all of them, they work in CSS. So no matter the size, if with the one, you can use one that you are familiar with, and it will work fine in CSS. The other CSS property that we should also look at is the color property. And so at least we've done that. We introduced the color blue in our CSS. And so yes, there are some unique, the unique codes or color codes that CSS recognizes, or color names, let me say. There are some color names that CSS recognizes. And these color names are the default colors that we know, the red, the blue, the yellow. I think CSS knows magenta, it knows violet, those ones. So you can just apply the name directly, and then CSS will see it with those colors. So red, yellow, blue, green, white, black, magenta, those colors, that tangerine and turquoise, CSS would see them. Other than that, I think the most common color property that people use is the hex code. And so the hex code is generally 6 digits, which is used to represent all colors. And so if, for instance, I write this color, this is the hex code for white, and then that is for 0. That is for black, sorry. And so all colors have hex code, and CSS also knows them. So once you know the right hex code, you can apply it for your colors. Other than that, you can also use the RGB property, and so that's a bit complicated. Those who actually know colors can do those things. So now let's also jump into writing some CSSs. And so let's look at some basic CSS that we can apply to our document. First of all, let me add some divs to our page so that we can properly add our CSS. Okay, so this is not, for now, almost all web, I think for almost all object-oriented programming languages, there's something that we call identifiers or classes. And basically, classes and identifiers are used to, just like the name identifiers stands for, it is used to be able to identify a particular item. So for instance, in HTML, I can use a class to tag. I can tag a certain HTML tag with a class. And so if I want to do anything to that tag, I can use that class name to affect that particular tag. And so let me give a clear example. So for instance, this div, I might write several divs. I think I even have several divs in the HTML. Okay, I think I've commented them, but that's fine. Let's say that I had several divs. So I can still do one. I can put one div under. So yes, so I have 2 divs in this my HTML code. If I want to apply styles to the div in my CSS, I can say that the div tag should have a background color. So background color is a CSS property. So it should have a background color of, let's say, green. Now let's run this code, and then we'll see what has happened. So and mind you, before your syntaxes take effect, you should make sure that you have saved your document. And so because I gave the div a background color of green, we realize that all the has changed to green. Now, mind you, there are several divs. At least we know we have two divs, this div and this div and that one. And so now they are all having the same color. Now, I don't want all the divs to be of the same color. Actually, I want just one div to have that color green. And so then I need to find a way to identify that particular div out of all the divs that I want to have a color green. And so that is where the classes or the identifiers come inside. And so we can use a class name, a class, or an ID. This is how you write an ID. It's the same way. So a class or an ID. So I can give an ID of class ID to tag the divs. And so if I change my CSS from div to dot class ID, a class name. Now, if I'm referencing a class, I need to bring a full stop. So every class, for CSS to know that whatever that is coming after is a class name, I need to precede it with a full stop. If it were an ID, I need to bring the hash sign. So this one shows that this particular class is a certain ID in the HTML page. And so let me save this code. Let me also save my code and then let me run. Okay, so our class didn't work. I don't know if you've recognized I used the wrong ID. The wrong ID name. The ID name is actually class ID. So let me change it. Okay, so now my code is supposed to work. Okay, so now the whole div has changed to green. And so that's for class IDs and class names. Okay, so now I want to style this div properly. So there's a property that I can add. I'm coming to add several properties to this div. First of all, I wouldn't use the background green. Let me use a color that is a bit friendly. So I'll choose this like an ash color. So I'll give it this background. Now I'll give it a width. Width is also another CSS property. So I'll give it a width and say I'm very used to pixels, and so I'll use the pixels. Let's say I'll give it 500 pixels, and then I would want to give it some space around it. So later I'll talk about margins and paddings, but let me use the margin and padding for now. I'll talk about it later. And so I'll give it the margin. There are 4 properties of a margin. We have the top, the left, right, and then the bottom. That is all the 4 corners of an item. Now I'll give it a margin of, for margin I'll use percentage, so that in terms of there's something we call response, when we are checking the responsiveness of the page that I'm building, it would be responsive to whatever screen we'll be using to. So I'll stick to the percentages. So I'll say a 10 pixel for the top, and then I'll give it maybe let me use 25, or no, let me use 30%. So now what will happen is, for my page to synchronize, now the width, I'll use a width of 40%. So let me save my code and then let me run it, so that let's see what happens. So you realize that now, because I don't know if you can see, or my screen is a bit smaller. Yes. So the page, there's been some spaces around. Some of the boxes are not going, but then they are not fitting the page because we've added some properties to it. So let me go and clear the property for the text area. So this is why the text area is not fitting. So I'll do this, I'll refresh, yes. So, okay, still on the classes. Now, another class we can add is padding. So the difference, margin and padding all deal with adding space around a certain item. But then for margin is when you add space outside of the item. And then padding is when you add the space inside. And so if, let's say I have this text editor that you can see, the outer space around the text editor where my mouse is hovering, if you can see it, the outer space. If I were to define this outer space, so let's say if this text editor was the item that I'm working with, and I want to define a certain boundary of space around it outside the text editor, I'll give it a margin. Now, if I want to leave some small space inside so that the contents of the text editor don't hit the direct edges of that text editor, I'll use padding. So padding would more like create some inside space around the text editor. So that's the difference between the margin and the padding. So I'll give a padding of, let's say, 20 pixels each. So I'll save. Now watch, you see how the text are hitting the div direct. If I refresh, because I've added the padding, if I refresh, you'll see that now there's some space around it. Yes, so that's for CSS. So maybe I'll take my time to go through some of the font styles so that we can have them all. Now, if I take my header 1, already we've looked at some of the CSS we can add to the header, but I want to also talk about other ones that are there. So we've done the font size, we've done the font weight, we can add a property of letter spacing. So there's a CSS letter spacing where you add individual spaces into your letters. You can add one for 5 pixels, and it would, when we refresh, it would, so you realize that the hello world has been bolding and spacing out. And we can also do alignment. And so if we want to, how we have normal alignment in Word documents, we can also align our text. So we can say our text should be aligned center. So if we do text alignment, you see our hello world has shifted into the center. So for the property alignment, you have left, right. You can do a left, you can do a right, you can do a center. You can also justify, just like you have it in Word or in any other text editor. You can do justify, and you can set it to initial so that it will take the alignment of its parent container. So that's for alignment. We can also, there's something that we call text decoration. So in a typical text editor, you can strike through, you can underline, you can those things. Those are decorations that normally we do to text. We can equally do it in CSS by using the property text decoration. So we can use underline, and then underline would, just like the name sounds, it would underline our text for us. So these are, and then we can also do text transform, which is, we use this text transform property to specify whether we want our CSS to be in uppercase or it should be in lowercase, or I mean, we should have the first letter as capitals and so. And so we decide that we want uppercase. It's just the same property, uppercase. Then it would make our whole text uppercase. We can decide that we will choose the lowercase and it will do that for us. And so, yes, there are lots that maybe in our spare time, I'll share some resources that in our spare time, we can look at these properties for text. We can also add some properties for fonts. And so we can specify the type of fonts that we want to use. And we can do that by adding a property called fonts family. So we say fonts space family. And then with this fonts family, we can say maybe we want Arial. And you can specify more than one font families. And so we can do Arial, we can do Helvetica. That's one font I really like. Helvetica. We can do serif. So what we've done now is that when CSS is looking for a font, it would first look for the Arial font. If he gets it, he will look for if he gets it, he will stay at Arial. If he doesn't get the Arial font, he will move to the Helvetica font. If he gets it, he stays. If he doesn't get it, he will move to the serif. If he gets it, then he will stay at serif. But if he doesn't, he will go on and on. Maybe let me add one more font, Garamond, the Garamond font. Yes. And so let's refresh our page and see what is happening. And so if you realize that our font has changed. So we can use, I talked about the developer tool. So we can use the developer tool to check which of the fonts that is working. And so we can also equally see our syntaxes here and which one applies to whatever we are doing. So we can also, just like we can add styles to our fonts. So we can decide that our font should have a style. And then in the font style, we can specify whether it should be italic or it should be. So let's say we want an italic font, which I don't really want, but just to show. So our font will slant. We can go on and on and on for fonts. So now let me just move on to something else. I've shared a resource and you can look for all that other properties in CSS. And so I would want to also talk about the margins and the paddings that I was talking about. So you realize that when I was adding the margin and padding, I added two properties, two different values for the margin and padding. Now, for CSSs of items where, for instance, in an item like a shape where there are 4 sizes, CSS is able to use one line of code to affect all the 4 sizes. And so for like margin, padding, border, and those likes, where you have 4 sizes, in writing the CSS, you can actually give all the 4 sizes, and it has a particular order that the sizes will take. And so, for instance, if I take this margin, all that I'm saying the first item that it will take is the top. So from the top, it goes to the right, then it goes to the bottom, and it goes to the left. I think that is what clockwise. So it goes clockwise and it starts at the top. So 4, these 4 represent top right, bottom left. That's how it is. I can also decide that I would just take 2. What will happen is it would still go clockwise. It will do top, then it will do the right, and it will do, this will be the bottom again, and the left. So if I represent 2, that's the meaning. And so, for instance, let me try and change something, and you see. Let me decide that I'll make this one 0. So the top and the bottom margin should be 0. Now look at, you see there's a 10 pixel space that I kept here. If I refresh, it has shifted small, but maybe you wouldn't see it. So instead of 0, let me make this one maybe 200 pixels. Even 200 pixels. And I refresh. Okay. So now there's a problem that we need to find. So our class ID, let me use the debug code, and then let me find our class ID. And so this is our margin. So we are saying that our margin top of 200 pixels. Oh, okay, it is there. It was my cursor that was kind of deceiving me. And so you can see that there's a long space there. Let me change it back to 0. So if I change it back to 0, you see the space here. Now, the 0 here means that the top and the bottom should be 0 pixels. So if I change it back to 0 and I refresh, now you see, let's go to the extreme top. See, there's no space here. So that's it. I can also input a third value in here so that it would be like this. So let's say if I put maybe a 10 pixels here, what I'm trying to say is that the top should remain 0. The left and right, now because there's only one value in the middle, that value in the middle represents the left and the right, or the right and the left. So I'm saying that the right and the left should be 30 pixels and the bottom should be 10 pixels. That's for when I do 3. Another thing that I can do is that I can basically use auto or represent any of them with auto. So if I do auto, I'm saying that the system should just use its discretion to assign any margin or padding to the value. I can do auto for just one section. So if I put auto in here, it means that the system should do a top of 0, then the left and the right should remain auto. So the system should set its own margin to the left and the right sides of the container, and then it should keep the bottom at 10 pixels. So that's it for margin. And these things that I've talked about, they apply for padding, they apply for even width, they apply for anything, any dimensional CSS that you'll be doing in the future. So anything that has dimensions, you can apply these things to. And so you can do the same for, if we were writing padding, we can do the same thing for that. There's also a CSS that I've not talked about. Let me talk about it because we use that often. So that's border. So there's a CSS called border, and normally you can give a border of 1 pixels solid, and then you add your color. So now with this kind of syntax, what we are saying is that the thickness of the border should be 2 pixels, or maybe I can increase it so that it stands out. We are saying that the thickness of the border should be 2 pixels. Then, normally in default borders, we have different kind of borders. We have the solid, which is the solid line. We have the dash, so you can do dash. You can do dashes or dashed. That's the right way, dashed. You can do dash and it will give you broken lines. So there are other properties for that. So that's the line that we want, and then the color of our border. So that's it. But equally, we could also do the four corners of the border. So, you know, typically we can write border top and give it a border top. This will just apply to the top border. So if I say border top of 5 pixels solid, and let me give the color of EA. I'm giving it a random color. If I do this and I refresh, you see that there's a pink border at the top. I can change it to any of the 4 sizes. So border right, and then it will shift to the right. Or I can do for all the 4 at a time. So I can do 5, I can do 1 pixel, 5, I can do 10 pixels, I can do 2 pixels, I can do 3 pixels. So then I have to do the border color. The border style or border color. So because I'm not compounding them, because every border property that I give should have the pixels of the border. It should have the style, which is either solid or dash, or and it should have the color. At least the border should have these 3 properties. And so once I decide to attach or attack all the 4 sizes of the border like I'm doing here, then I have to specify beneath my code the style, and then I have to specify the color too. So I'll give it a color, and then I'll say EAA, and then I have to close my syntax. So if I come and I refresh, so you see that there's a border around it. Let me use my code. Okay, now my border syntax is not responding. Okay. Just in case I decide to stay. Okay. So maybe to be on the safer side, we can still stick to whether we can give it a border top. We can use the border and then we give it all the sizes, or we can compound all the 3 in 1, because that is the standard that people do. So instead of doing the border for all the 4 sizes, you can just compound all the 3 in 1 like that, and then that will work. So that's for border. Now the other thing that we can do quickly before we do a little bootstrap is we can do border radius too. So border radius gives a curve, more like the curved edges that you have. And so for instance, if I want a circle, I can do a border radius of 100 pixels, and it will convert. Now unfortunately my div is too big, so if I do a circle, it wouldn't really fit well. But then this, if I had a square figure and I do this 100, it will give me a complete circle. Or we can just add some small border or some small rounded corners to the edges. So maybe I can do a border pixel of, let's say, 15, a border radius of 15 pixels. And then we'll just give it a smooth rounded corner. So that's it for some basic CSS. So that's it for CSS. The rest, after I'll share the W3 school resource, we can just look at. It's just what is left now is for us to familiarize ourselves with the various properties of CSS. But at least in writing the syntax, that's all we need to know. This is how it's done. We've been able to successfully add an external CSS link. That is all that we need. So I'll share a resource so that we can look at the others. So quickly, let me do Bootstrap, and then we'll continue. So you see how with this small CSS, look at all these line of codes just for something small that we've done today. And so developers thought it wise. Our guys from Twitter, they thought it wise that they create something that would help styling, that will make styling easier. And so they introduce bootstraps. And so bootstraps are how do you call it? They are more like libraries that you call with already written styles for you. And so once you reference these frameworks, you are able to have access to countless number of styles by using just the class or the styles. That, so for instance, if we wanted to center like we did, all we did for this particular line of code is to center this box. You could have done that with maybe just a simple style. And so there are plenty frameworks that are there. We have that for Bootstrap, there's Material, and then they are there, but we'll be looking at Bootstrap. So basically that's what Bootstrap does. Now to work with Bootstrap, equally Bootstrap has many versions. There's been version 3, there's 4, there's even 5. But we are going to look at 4 because even though 5 is out, the 3 and 4 are the most widely used Bootstrap versions. 5, I mean, people are still now adjusting to the 5. So we'll stick to the 4. The Bootstrap 4. To use Bootstrap, you have to reference the Bootstrap library. There are 2 ways of referencing the library. They have what we call the CDN. So if you look for Bootstrap 4, they have the Bootstrap 4 CDN, and the CDN is just a URL link. So what happens is with the CDN, you will need the internet anytime. You don't have to, worry yourself with downloading anything. So I can just download this Bootstrap CDN, and then I add it to my page. And so once I add this, defaultly I have Bootstrap on my page. So Bootstrap comes with a CSS and a JS, but I'll just stick to the CSS for now. So once I do this, I have Bootstrap on my page. The drawback of using a CDN is that even though normally the CDNs are faster, when they load, they are more like compressed. And so once you get the CDN, everything is faster. But then the other way around too is that I can download the Bootstrap itself. The advantage of downloading the Bootstrap itself is that you have it for offline capabilities. And so if I want to use Bootstrap offline, I don't have internet, then so I can download it. To download, you go to the Bootstrap official site. That's getbootstrap.com. And then you can download the Bootstrap version. When you are downloading, just be mindful that you are set to 4. And so I'll download this. Let me download this. I will go through quickly. And then, yes. So once I download this, I'll open where it is. I'll just copy it to my desktop, and where I have my Geospatial Technologies folder. I think it's at the desktop. And then I'll put it here. So I'll extract. Let me delete this one. It needs to be. Then to make it easier for me to reference, I would want to rename this thing to just Bootstrap. And so that I have it here. So I have Bootstrap. I'm yet to reference, but once I'm here, let me do some structure and arrangement. So what I'll also do is, normally for me, standardization wise, when I'm starting a project, I create some standard folders and things for my resources. And so once I'm here, I'll add some folders for CSS. I'll add one folder for JS. Wouldn't be using JS here, but maybe later you would reference. And then I'll add another one for images. and any other thing that you can add. People would also tend to put all these folders in one folder they will call assets, but that is up to you. Anyhow, it will help you. So yes, I have Bootstrap. So now let's go and reference. So when you open the Bootstrap, it has CSSs. It has a lot of them. You wouldn't use all of them. I mean, just you need one. Most of them are even doing the same thing. For instance, the main, when you see any main attached to any resource, it means that it has been minified. Minified means that the code has been compressed. So normally you open it, you see just one line, but then it goes through, can go through. So it just means that it has been compressed. So that's a compressed version of the Bootstrap. And then the normal Bootstrap will be bootstrap.css. And so I can reference the minified. I can reference the minified Bootstrap in my page. So now instead of using the CDN link, I can just navigate to my directory. Now we save the name as Bootstrap, so be mindful. We don't have the dist folder, we just have, and so this is the directory where you can get my Bootstrap. Now, once I'm calling it from my local host, I don't really need a cross-browser, cross-origin thing. So I just leave it as simple and as tight as this. So now, normally, because Bootstrap is like a mother CSS, it has to, in arrangement, it has to come first before all the stylings, because it might override some of your styles. And in running, when HTML is running, it starts from the top. So it runs the code one after the other from the top. So Bootstrap will run first. And whatever is in, so for instance, if you look at these two styles, whatever is in this my style document should override what is in Bootstrap, unless I decide to make it the priority. I can set a priority by using a CSS function called important. So if I add important to a code, it means that no matter the styles that come beneath or come after this particular style, make this one the topmost. And so then this one becomes priority. But other than that, if I don't do the important, then what it means is that Bootstrap would the priority will begin to the current or the latest item that it has been, that is run, or the most current one. That is what would have the priority. Okay, so I would want to move this our style sheet into our CSS folder, and so I'll just give it the CSS directly, and then what happens is that I just have to come and then move our style.css into the CSS folder that I created. And so I'm sure if I run, our page will still be intact, yes. So you realize that Bootstrap has shrunk our page a bit. That means that Bootstrap classes have started to function now. So yeah, now we have Bootstrap on our page. Let's quickly go through a few Bootstrap lines before we continue. And the most important Bootstrap, okay, even before we go to the most important Bootstrap class or the most important reason why people like using Bootstrap, Bootstrap has something they call container. So now instead of me, for me, I used this particular class or ID as a container or as a mother container. With Bootstrap, you see how, okay, so you see how I did class ID, and I had to come and write all this to kind of center the container that I have. I could have just simply give it a class of class container. So if I give this a class of container is a Bootstrap class. So defaultly, let me take this ID out, and then if I run, so you see that defaultly now there's some stuff that has been added. If you remember how it was, there's some style that has been added to the text already. I don't know if you can appreciate, some style has been added to the text already. And then without the container, if I clear this class container, you see that, let me clear. So now you see the difference. And then let me also comment out the Bootstrap. So you see, so even I've not written any code yet, but Bootstrap has started, adding some styles to my code. So now I also introduce my class ID again. So container puts everything together for you in Bootstrap. Let's go to the most important reason why people prefer Bootstrap. Bootstrap makes our work responsive. And so Bootstrap has something they call grade system. Now, the grade system is in such a way that how maybe you develop something, and then when it goes to, now there are several screens that people use. Even in laptops, we have the 16-inch, we have the 17-inch, then we have the 13-inch. So if somebody develops something for using a 16-inch screen, you realize that when a 13-inch runs the thing, it becomes distorted in a way. Bootstrap has a way of taking care of that. And so by doing that, Bootstrap has introduced a grade system that will help you and defaultly align your work. So I'll clear all my existing code, and then so that we can do some Bootstrap grade stuff. Okay. So now there's a container. Let me introduce some divs. Okay. So this is a div, a class. Row is also a Bootstrap class, and it just works just as we have row in our tables. So that's what the row function does. It puts everything in a block container, so, and keeps them in a row for you. Now, let me add some Bootstrap. So let me add another div, and let me give it a class. And let me do maybe container in here. Okay. So I have this 4 containers. Let me run this code so that we see how it's working. And please, are we following?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So yes, so we have these 4 containers, and we see how these containers are showing here. But if I introduce the Bootstrap grade system, so in the grade system, these are just simple classes that you can use. So let's say I introduce this. This simply means that Bootstrap should divide my screen into 4. Now, let me run this before I explain the code. So if I do this and I refresh, now you see that the containers, they are spacing inside the containers, and then they have been arranged in a way for me. Now, Bootstrap defaultly, what Bootstrap does is it divides your screen into 12 grids for you, and then you decide how you want your containers to appear. Now, in the 12 grid, you can specify which number of grids the first container should carry, the second and the third, and that. So out of the 12, I said that 4 should be given to one container, the next 4 and the next 4. So you see, this 12 is up. That is how come this container was ended up on the next line. And even when it ended up on the next line, you realize that it fell in line with the first one. I can simply put them, or I can simply do a 3. And we know that 3 by 4 is what? 12. So this one will fill the entire width. And so you see, I have all the 4 containers in line. Now, if you look at the code, this is a column, a normal column that we know. This SM is used to specify which kind of screen the grade should apply to. And so I'm saying that this 3 should be applied to a smaller screen. I can do this for a larger screen, which is LG. They have extra large screen, which is XLG. I can do it for a medium-sized screen. Then what we have, which is the smaller screen. And then I can do it for an extra small screen. And so luckily with Bootstrap, what I can do is, with the SM screen, I can say it should be 6. So each container should have a grade of 6. Then I can do for a medium screen. So please let me write for all. I can do for a medium screen and say the medium screen should be 4. Now let me refresh. Okay, no, let me do 3 because 3 makes a perfect number, a perfect 12. So now let's watch. If I begin to minimize, you realize that now it has changed. I didn't set any grade of 6, but it automatically calculates my screen and then starts to align. Okay, let me add some CSSs to my boxes, and then we can appreciate what I'm saying. So let me add a style, and let me add a background color, a background. So let me give this one maybe red, but then this one should be yellow, blue, and green. Yes. So if I begin to minimize, now you see how defaultly my containers are arranging themselves. So that's the power of Bootstrap. And I don't necessarily have to have the same boxes. All that matters is that one particular row should be 12 grades. And so within the 12, I can decide. I can say, maybe I want this one as, for the medium, I want this one as 4. I want this one as 3. I want this one as 4. But 4. So maybe I can do 4, 2, 4, and 2. And so you realize that, yeah, 4, 2, 4, and 2. If I start minimizing, yes, and 12. So automatically it just detects the screen and it starts aligning your pages for you. There are several other Bootstrap, apart from the grade system, there are several other Bootstrap classes, but for that, because we are interested in building just a WebGIS page, I'm not going to dwell too much on the other ones, but maybe we can do a few of them quickly. And the way time is going, maybe we'll develop the web dashboard on Monday instead. I thought I could do it now, but we'll do that on Monday instead. So equally, how we had header tags, Bootstrap would make use of that header tag and give it some Bootstrap classes for you and stuff. Okay, we have 15 minutes to go. I don't know if I should quickly. Okay, so now, because we have 15 minutes, okay, so guys, what I'll do is I don't want to jump into the WebGIS dashboard for now, so that we wouldn't have time to finish. So I'll do that on Monday, God willing. So I would want to end this class here and then open up for questions or comments. Or Ernest, what do you think?
I think let's allow them to digest this and practice how these CSSs, CSS, and the way that what you've taught today, how they work. They should just play with it. Then, God willing, Monday we can now start building our WebGIS portal. So Eugene will start with the framework that we'll be developing. So it will continue like that. So when he does the HTML CSS, Jedediah will come in, teach you how to use JavaScript and all that. Then I'll come in. So we'll be using the same. So we'll be building the template gradually till the end. Yeah. So Eugene, let's start on Monday. We can open the floor for questions. Yeah, and I think there are 2 questions already on the page, so you can maybe tackle that whilst the others add the questions.
Okay. Thank you very much. So I think let me go down. Okay. I'll do that for the last tutorial. I'll do that. So yeah, thank you very much. The Kofi's question is a very important one. So you see, for classes and IDs, they are all identifiers in a way. But what happens is that IDs are unique and classes can affect everybody. And so let me use like a university as an example. You know how in your university we have courses, and so there are several people who are doing a course. So you have a course mate, and if maybe you want to give a particular course, maybe you want to give them some exercise books, you can say, oh, all people reading computer science, come for a handout. So computer science is a way of identifying a group of people so that we don't repeat it. But with IDs are unique to each person, so you cannot repeat IDs. That's why when you went to school, your ID number is it's unique to you, only you. If they mention your ID number, nobody is supposed to have your ID. So those are the difference. Depending on what you do, sometimes classes come in handy because maybe you want to reuse classes for other containers. So you just have to give them that class. But if you give those CSS to an ID, you cannot reuse them because IDs cannot be used more than once. ID is unique to the element. So that's why. But basically, they are all used to identify a certain thing, and then you add them.
Thanks.
Yeah. So yeah, I think I was also sharing a nice view. So yes, you can have them all for the same element. Yes, but it depends on what particular code you are writing and how you want it to affect that particular element. If it is unique to that element, for instance, let's say even in the code, I have a lot of columns with column SM6. So I have a lot of these. So this is a class, and one CSS is used to affect this container. So container 1 to 4, one CSS has been used to affect them. But this style that I gave, I could have just decided that I'll just give it to an ID. So I'll give an ID of container 1. Container 1 like this, and then I'll give the class red to just this ID so that it doesn't affect all of them. That's basically what the 2 stands for, but they are used for the same thing. I think somebody is also asking that why is it that I didn't do Bootstrap 5 and also I'm not using VS Code. I take the VS Code. You know, for VS Code, I think it's more like a matter of preference and convenience. And for me, typically, you know, even before, like I've been using Sublime Text for a long time. And so, yes, there are projects where I use VS Code, but I'm more like attached to Sublime Text. And so I tend to prefer it. And I feel like VS Code is robust. Like it's too robust, especially when you're doing light things like that. VS Code is robust. But Sublime Text is quite simple. It's like the normal text editor we do, but I still have some modern functionalities that I will need a text editor to do. So that is why I stick to Sublime Text. But I think VS Code is a very good text editor, and if you're okay with it, I mean, why not? You can use it. And for Bootstrap, you know, like I said earlier that yes, Bootstrap 5 is out and people are using it, but I just stick to the 4 because I realized that, you know, the 4 and 3, especially when you are starting out and you need a lot of resources to run to, the 4 and the 3 have a lot of help that people can get. The 5 is relatively new. And so once and normally I even want people to start with the Bootstrap 3 because they tend to understand the evolution better when they are using Bootstrap 3. But yeah, 3 is far gone. So that's why I stick to the 4. But I mean, the 5 is also cool, but I use the 4 so that, I mean, we can also not just see where we are, but we can appreciate the evolution. I don't know if that question is answered. Yeah, please. Any other question or any other comments? The ladies in the house, can the ladies ask a question? I mean, the guys are talking. I think Yao is also typing. So let's wait for Yao's question and then we can. Okay. So okay. Okay. Oh, okay. Could you ask the question earlier, which I didn't get? I think the second question you said, is Bootstrap CSS the same as? Okay, so you know, I think Yao has answered, but then to add to what Yao is saying, just like he's saying, they are pre-processed style for us, and so it saves a lot of time. I mean, when you use Bootstrap a lot, it saves a lot of time. For instance, you know, when we're trying to have our containers, you know, fit different screens, if we're to do that in a typical CSS, what we would have done is we would have to write something they call media queries. So you have to specify for a screen of 700 pixels. This is how the CSS should be. For a maximum screen of 1000 pixels, this is so. For you to get this particular thing that Bootstrap has done for us now, you need to write a lot of media queries or a lot of CSS codes to do that. But Bootstrap just did that for you with just one class or maybe a few classes. And so that's one advantage of Bootstrap as compared to other CSSs. Also, maybe we've not done it, but Bootstrap is not just CSS based. Even in JavaScript, there are some basic functionalities that maybe you want in JavaScript, Bootstrap will do for you. So it just simplifies CS, and we don't write. It saves us from writing a lot of CSS codes for small things that we need to do. Yes. So basically, that's it. Okay. So thanks, guys. And God willing, on Monday we'll develop our web dashboard, and then that will be for HTML and CSS. So do have a great evening. And Ernest, you can take over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eugene. And thank you, everyone, for making the time this evening. And as I keep saying, please let's try as much as possible to practice whatever has been taught. If you leave it for some time, you'll forget it, especially if you're a newbie. Yeah, so as we are trying to get all these, try as much as possible to also explore more. As I mentioned earlier in my earlier sessions, I said it's a mentorship program. We are teaching you, pointing out the key stuff or the basic stuff for you to appreciate how these things have been built. It's up to you to do the extra, go the extra mile to also read along what has been taught, so that you can also broaden your skills. And the other thing is, what we'll learn on Monday, what Eugene will be teaching will be the start or like the beginning of the WebGIS application that we'll be building. So he's going to teach you how to build a container. Then, as I said earlier, Jed will come in with the introduction to JavaScript. Then he will also touch base on Bootstrap JS and some jQuery stuff. Then we will now dive into our map library, that's leaflets, trying to get the data onto our leaflets, then do some 1 or 2 spatial analysis. Then we can wrap up our geoportal. Then we can move on to other things. So God willing, Monday, try as much as possible to practice, like try to understand what Eugene has taught for the past 3, let's say for the past week, so that when we start building it, you wouldn't, like when he says an ID, you should know what an ID is. So I would expect you to input that before he even types on the screen. When he mentions a class, you should know what a class is. So let's read along and practice, and I'm hoping by the time we finish with this whole program, we'll have 90% of us like capable of building a similar applications like what we'll be doing. All right, so thank you and have a nice evening, afternoon, morning. Stay blessed. All right, bye-bye.